Wow, great to see everyone here today for this very, very special occasion. I want to say something about the parasha, this week's Torah reading that we read. There's a special set of mitzvot which teaches us that we're not allowed to charge interest on a loan. And we have to understand what the Torah is really looking for in this situation. When the Torah says that when you loan out money, you shouldn't charge interest before getting it paid back, it's not because the Torah wants you to not make money or to not be able to do business. You see, when the Torah says give a loan, what the Torah is trying to do is to say give a loan to someone who needs it, to someone who's poor. In the Torah's terms, giving a loan is the highest form of tzedakah. It's the way of taking care of other people. And what we see in this week's parasha is something really incredible. We see something that the Torah is truly interested in. Most people think that religion and Torah only takes place in the shul, in the midrash, in the school. It's between me and God. But what the Torah teaches us is one of the most important things and one of the special parts of Judaism, which is we're interested in all those things. It's very important to have deep emunah, to pray well, to have good connection with Hashem, to learn Torah. But it's also important to make sure that that informs that you have a good society. That you have a good society. The Torah cares just as much how we treat other people, that we have a good society around us, a good set of rules, a good set of government, a good set of leaders. That's just as important as our relationship with Hashem, because Hashem cares about how we relate to one another. And therefore, one of the things that's very important to us is our love for our country, our society, the United States of America. It's something that we're very proud of. And as strongly as we feel about the Israeli flag, we feel just as strongly about the American flag. And that's something that's very, very important to us. And when we have people in our midst that are willing to really do the hard work of serving and making sure that we have a good society, we have to recognize them. I actually have to take a split second before I recognize our very special guest today to recognize a very special graduate. I'm going to actually ask him to stand up. His name is Mr. Joey Cohen-Sabin. Joey sat in these seats not so long ago. He's a graduate of the Yeshiva of Flatbush, and he is running for state assembly this fall, right, Joe? It's this fall. It's a great source of pride, and actually, if you need a summer internship, he's looking for volunteers. So speak to Pathfinders, because Joey's looking for help. But I want to say that as important as the values that I mentioned about creating a good society, that's why the guest that we have today is so special. We have today not just a member of Congress, but honestly, one of the most important Americans in the United States today. This is Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leader of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. And I want to explain to you why he's so important. First of all, because many of us think politics are being on opposite ends and disagreeing to the point that we're fighting and insulting. And one of the things you'll never see Congressman Jeffries do is do that. Because Congressman Jeffries is the type of person that reaches to the people who disagree with him and say, how can we agree? Because we have to run a country together. And even though a lot of times the headlines goes to the disagreements and sometimes dysfunction, it's people like Congressman Jeffries who are here to serve. Congressman Jeffries, if you didn't know, was born in Brooklyn, went to school down the block, lives in Brooklyn, serves the Brooklyn community. So he understands what it means to have a great country. It's built on a great society, people who serve, people who find common interests, people who stand for the right values. So it's a tremendous honor for us today to welcome Congressman Hakeem Jeffries to speak to you for a few minutes.
Good morning, everyone. What an honor and a privilege to be here at Yeshiva of Flatbush. First of all, Rabbi Beta, thank you so much for your leadership, for what you do on behalf of the education of our young people in this community. Thank you for those very generous words of introduction. My only regret is that my mother wasn't here to hear it. But I appreciate you, what you represent to Joe and to Louis, Joey, all of the distinguished members of the community who are here. It really is an honor and a privilege to stand before you as your representative of the United States Congress in the House of Representatives. As Rabbi Beta mentioned in his remarks, I was born in Brooklyn Hospital, raised in Crown Heights, went to Midwood High School, not too far from where we are right now. And so your values are my values are your values, and it's an honor to represent each and every person in this room and to make sure that you have every opportunity to experience and pursue the great American dream. As a member of the House of Representatives, it's a privilege to serve the communities in Brooklyn that I was elected to stand up for down in Washington, D.C. The framers of the Constitution envisioned the House of Representatives as the institution that was closest to the American people. It's the reason why the House of Representatives has 2-year terms as opposed to the presidency, the 4-year term, the United States Senate, the 6-year term, or the Supreme Court, life tenure. 2 years that we would have to go back to the people that we represent to have our employment contracts renewed. Why 2 years? Because the framers wanted the House, the institution that I serve in, to be the closest to all of you, the closest to the American people, to reflect the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations, the fears, the concerns, the anxieties, and of course, in the words of the framers, the passions of the American people. Now, perhaps the framers could never have imagined that one day someone named Hakeem Jeffries would be serving in the United States Congress or speaking before the Yeshiva of Flatbush. But that is the great thing about America. And you all represent America in the 21st century, people of all races and religions and cultures and ethnicities. And so it's a great honor to stand before you as your representative, fighting for the things that matter to you, your families, our communities. And I recognize that one of the important things, important to the United States, important to the free world, is for us to continue to recognize Israel's right to defend itself against brutal terror, the need for Israel to crush Hamas and decisively defeat this organization, the need to make sure that every single hostage comes back home, and the need to make it clear on the global stage that Israel has a right to exist unequivocally as a Jewish and democratic state and an eternal homeland for the Jewish people always and forever. There's a special relationship between the United States and Israel that has existed now for 76 years. It's a special relationship that is anchored in our shared democratic values and our shared strategic interests. But I think particularly as we confront the horrors of what took place on 10/7, largest loss of Jewish life on a single day since the Holocaust, that is particularly important as we strive to find a way forward, once Hamas is defeated, to achieve a just and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. But it's important for us to recognize the moral reason for Israel's existence, the reason why every American, every decent, humane person throughout the world should stand behind Israel and its right to exist and defend itself. And it's anchored, in my view, in something different than our shared democratic values or our shared strategic interests. A few years ago, when I was on the way into Congress and having conversations with people throughout the district that I was hoping to represent, few conversations really stood out for me, and one in particular related to someone from this community who said to me, you know, Hakeem, I grew up in a household where there was always a suitcase that was packed. And one day I had to ask the question to my grandmother or grandfather, where are we going? We're going on vacation? Are we going to visit family? Why is that suitcase packed? But then the answer wasn't that there was a vacation that was being planned. The answer was that, well, if you think about the Jewish experience for thousands of years, it has sometimes horrifically been the case that the Jewish community has faced pain or persecution or pogroms or expulsions from country after country after country in the Middle East or in Europe. And that you never know, as a Jew in the world, when you might be forced to leave. We won't allow that to ever happen in America, but you never know, based on our experience for thousands of years. And so that is why the suitcase was packed. The moral case, in my view, for Israel, as important and as wonderful as the Jewish community's experience has been in America, and we've got to deal with and will and crush the unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism in the United States of America. But the moral case, I've said to people who may disagree with my perspective, is that as long as I have a single constituent who, because of the history of the Jewish people, feels compelled to have a suitcase that is packed because of the thousands of years of history, that I will always stand for the ability of Israel to exist, given that history, as a safe haven for the Jewish people. One country out of 195 or 96 in the world, the size of New Jersey. The moral case is that we should always stand up for Israel, its existence as an eternal homeland for the Jewish people, always and forever. Always and forever. Now, at the same time, as I close my remarks, we've got to deal with, and we will, the dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents that we've seen in America, on college campuses, and across the world. It was on the rise since about 2016, and it has accelerated since the events of October 7th. But I want to make clear to you that we in the Congress, in a bipartisan way, are going to make sure that we work together, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as Americans, to crush anti-Semitism with the fierce urgency of now and never allow it to rise again, so that you can continue to have a future in this community, in this city, in this country, free of anti-Jewish hate, free of anti-Semitism, free of bigotry. Because when that happens, I'm confident that your talent, your ability, your heart, your work ethic, your training, your spirituality suggests to me that yes, these are trying times in America, but I can look at you and realize that the future in America will be brighter than our past, as you will continue to take the torch, lead us forward, and continue America's march toward a more perfect union. Because of all of you, the best is yet to come. God bless you. God bless Israel. May God continue to bless the United States of America.
What are some initiatives you have taken in respect to the rise of anti-Semitism in college campuses?
It's a great question. One of the first things that we've done over the last few weeks, and this was done in connection with the appropriations bill, and this relates both to the college campus situation, but let me zoom out for a moment because this is an important initiative and it applies to the Yeshiva of Flatbush and other schools throughout America, is that in connection with our appropriations bill and in connection with the bipartisan national security bill that will provide security assistance, of course, to Israel and Ukraine and our allies in the Indo-Pacific, like Taiwan, that in that legislation, as well as in our normal appropriations bill that had been passed in March, in total, we secured $650 million in security grants for yeshivas and shuls and synagogues and other churches and houses of worship to make sure that you would have the safety and security to protect you against anyone who may try to engage in harm. So that was the first step that we've taken, but there are additional steps that we need to continue to take. I think one thing that was done in the House of Representatives is that we are trying to establish a uniform understanding, uniform definition of anti-Semitism, so that the Department of Education, which at the federal government level has the responsibility for investigating incidents of anti-Semitism on college campuses, will have both an ability to conduct a thorough investigation and to hold people accountable, which is why, in addition to establishing that uniform definition as it relates to anti-Semitism, and we took that step in the House, and there's now work to be done in the Senate, we are trying to secure additional resources as part of the Combating Anti-Semitism Act for the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, so that it can both thoroughly investigate on college campuses the instances of anti-Semitic hatred, but most importantly, upon the completion of a full and fair investigation, hold any perpetrators accountable. Hold any perpetrators accountable so that we can stop it and deter it from ever happening again.
Thankfully, you have been one of Israel's top Democratic supporters in the House. What are some ways you're trying to influence other Democrats that are not necessarily pro-Israel?
It's a great question. kind of feel like I'm on Meet the Press right now. This is very impressive student body. I think that, as I mentioned, making the strategic case, the values-based case, and the moral case, for Israel will continue to be important, and also to help try to put the situation that Israel confronts in context. I visited Israel, as I mentioned, to some of the leaders in the community earlier, now 7 times, 6 as a member of Congress, my first time as a member of the New York State legislature. And I'll never forget that in my first visit to Israel, I had an opportunity to talk to someone who was part of the security apparatus as a pull-aside, and we were on our way. I think we had perhaps just visited Yad Vashem, which is always very sobering. I've been multiple times, and we were on our way to the south of Israel in Sderot, and this was in December of 2008, and so rockets were just beginning to fly from Gaza. And I had an opportunity to talk to a member of the security apparatus, and I said to him, I said, how would you, in a phrase, in a sentence, describe to me the situation that Israel confronts in the Middle East? And I'll never forget it. He said, Hakeem, Israel lives in a tough neighborhood. Israel lives in a tough neighborhood. I always thought that was so sharp and simplistically articulated so that it's easy to understand. Easy to understand what Israel confronts on the ground. A dangerous situation in the south, in the Sinai. Hamas in Gaza, and of course, Israel has to complete the job and decisively defeat Hamas. Hamas in Gaza. Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon. The Houthis in Yemen. I thought about that recently. I said, wow, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. What is it about the letter H in the Middle East? By the way, I'm a big fan of the letter H, but Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah to the north, the Houthis in Yemen, dangerous situation in the Sinai, east of the Golan Heights, of course, dangerous situation in Syria, chaotic situation in Iraq and Iran, calling Israel the little Satan, America the great Satan, an enemy of both of our countries, and threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. I grew up in central Brooklyn, came of age in the mid-'80s, the crack cocaine epidemic, the early 90s. It was a tough neighborhood. I know from tough neighborhoods, and Israel lives in a tough neighborhood. And here's what I've learned, that in a tough neighborhood, the only thing at the end of the day that your neighbors will respect is strength. Is strength. Which is why we support Israel's qualitative military edge. It's the reason for it. You can achieve peace, but you can only achieve peace in a tough neighborhood through strength. That's why we will continue to stand behind Israel and support its security needs.
Victor Brown.
Representative, thank you for being here and for all your support. We really appreciate it. So we're all high school students, right? We'll be all going to college in the next couple of years. And I wanted to know what you thought about, evaluating university presidents on their granting free speech rights to students, protesters, while also protecting Jewish students from harassment and from these exact protests. I want to know what you think about that.
Yeah, great question. And I think there are many university presidents who are not in the news who have gotten it right, and of course the whole host of others who have gotten it wrong. And I think it will continue to be important, as you indicated so eloquently in your question, that the First Amendment is an important part of the fabric of our country, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the right to protest, the right to gather, civil disobedience in certain circumstances, but the challenge is it all has to be peaceful. It all has to be peaceful. And clearly, there are demonstrations that have crossed the line into hate speech. And those demonstrations that have crossed the line into hate speech cannot be tolerated. And the administrations have to be very clear about that, draw a bright line, and of course, make sure that there is some accountability. And so I think you've had college campuses, I think maybe by the last count that I've seen, 60 or so that have had serious disruptions, demonstrations, encampments. Also important to understand that in the United States of America, there are 6,000 colleges and universities. And so there are many college presidents who have gotten it right, and we need to learn the lessons from those college campuses where there's been quiet about how you can both respect the ability of people to express a variety of different opinions while at the same time making sure you protect in every possible way the safety and security of your Jewish students.